Chapter 7. Perry slapped Martin smartly with the reins, neither getting nor expecting results. The horse, named in honor of Mr. Fowler, who had made it possible for Perry to own him, did not move the least bit faster. He plodded along at the same gait at which he had traveled since leaving home, headed for school. But he did continue to move, and that was something for which to be grateful. "Get up!" Perry repeated, slapping his mount with the reins again. Behind him, wearing her school uniform, sat Celeste, a hand on his waist to steady herself, her feet dangling down Martin's fat sides. Each step he took jiggled her a little. It was almost like riding in a ship through a rough seas. But she did not complain. The situation was most difficult for Perry than for her. Neither one had much to say, for if they did talk, what would it be about? The school was not quite what they had thought it would be. To begin with, Celeste was the only girl in a uniform. All the others wore bright cottons, and since this was September, most of the dresses were summer ones, many trimmed in lace or embroidery. The mammas, thinking their daughters would outgrow the dresses before next summer, were letting them wear their best ones. Letty Malone had explained the situation to Celeste. Among the other girls, the newcomer from France, wearing a dark blue pleated skirt, a white blouse, and a Breton sailor hat with a streamer hanging down her back, felt ill at ease and out of place. Celeste could not decide whether she had been fortunate in that Miss Alice, the pretty teacher, had assigned her to Letty Malone as a seatmate. Letty's papa was Mr. Malone, who owned the store, so naturally she wore the prettiest clothes of any girl in school. "Your dress," Letty had asked politely the first day. "Is it the sort of clothes girls wear to school in France?" "Yes," Celeste had told her, feeling her face grow scarlet with embarrassment. "It is a uniform. In France all the girls wear them." "My goodness!" Letty giggled. "How does the teacher know you apart?" She turned her head to one side to survey her new seatmate more closely. "Well," she said finally, "it looks sort of funny, but sort of nice, too. Anyway, I'm glad Miss Alice is going to let you sit with me. Most of the time I have to sit by myself. The teachers always say I talk too much." Letty giggled again, evidently not in the least minding the reputation she had achieved for herself. "And I, too, am glad," Celeste assured her. Letty's kindness was helping to make things easier in this school, where she knew no one. "Besides," Letty added, "it is sort of nice to have a French girl for a seatmate. Sort of foreign and different." She had meant it as a compliment, but the words did not make Celeste happy. She did not want French to be French and different. She wanted to be American, of course, now that the Dantons were here, and a Texan as well. "Get up!" Perry commanded Martin again at this moment, since they had come to the first houses scattered on the outskirts of Marcy. A few more blocks and they would reach school. Celeste felt pity for Perry, who would arrive at the school with his sister riding behind him. The boys laughed at him enough as it was. They called him Frenchy, and kept urging him to knock the thing that they called home run in baseball. They mimicked his manner of talking, and sometimes the way he shrugged his shoulders, or waved his hands when he became excited. They did not do this unkindly. Actually, they seemed to like Perry. But also they did not forget that he was French, and as Letty had said, different. Even from a distance of several blocks, the Dantons could see a baseball game was already in progress. The boys were batting a ball around, yelling themselves hoarse, and running like mad once they hit the ball. It was almost confusing. "Get up," Perry said, giving Martin by far the most severe whack he had yet inflicted. Perhaps if he got to school quickly there might be a chance he would get in on the game. He had no great hope, but still, he could try. Tom Butterworth, who was also his seatmate, said Perry was a very fast runner, and that if he had ever hit a ball, he could run around the bases like greased lightning. In time, perhaps, he could learn to hit the ball. Failing that, he might be of some use in the place they called the field, catching balls knocked there by the batters. If one caught a ball, he was said to have put out the opponent who had hit the ball. Perry felt he could catch the balls well enough, if only he had a glove to protect his hand. He sat a little straighter in the saddle. Perhaps in time he might get a glove for himself. Had he not managed for a horse and a saddle? With the glove, it was possible he would not always be chosen last, if he was chosen at all. He tried not to mind that Celeste rode behind him. It was unthinkable that she would walk the 4 miles to school, just as it was unthinkable that Papa should let her ride one of the work horses. These were needed by Papa himself to break up additional ground for planting. When he saw how well the maize they first planted had done, Papa knew he must get more land under cultivation. All the same, Perry let himself dream just for a moment of what it would be like to ride up alone to the hitch rack in front of the schoolhouse and slip easily and jauntily from the back of his horse. He tried pretending it was a fine, smart horse, such as the cowboys rode, but dismissed the thought as being disloyal to Martin. This done, he would saunter toward the boys who were playing ball. While he was at it, he might as well pretend that all the boys immediately began to call, "Come on, Perry, we want you on our side." "Stop!" Celeste cried so urgently, he looked around to see if by any chance she had fallen off. "Quisi quiala?" he asked, so lost in his dream that he had broken to French. "I mean," he corrected himself, "what's the matter?" "I see Letty," she told him. "I want to walk the rest of the way with her." Sure enough, there was Letty Malone walking along by herself. As yet she had not seen Celeste. Perry pondered the matter, not sure that his sister had given her real purpose. He had observed Celeste was shy around this Texas girl, just as he was shy with the boys, making no effort to push himself into their game. It occurred to him that Celeste might be using this as an excuse to allow him to ride to school by himself. But without warning or waiting for a reply, Celeste slid off Martin's back, straightened her skirt, and made sure her 2 braids were hanging down properly from her back. This done, she walked toward Letty, who, fortunately, turned and saw her. "Oh, hello," she said. "Did you walk to school this morning?" "No," Celeste told her shyly. "I rode, as always, behind my brother." She considered adding the information that Perry rode his own horse, having earned the money with which he paid for it. One look at Martin's fat sides and his plodding walk, however, restrained her. Perhaps Letty would not consider this a great achievement? "I thought I would walk the rest of the way to school with you, if it is all right?" Celeste asked, in an upward questioning inflection in her voice. "Why, of course," Letty assured her. "I am so very glad to have you." She put her arm around Celeste's shoulder, giving her a little squeeze. Seeing this, Perry rode on in good conscience. He did not feel in the least that he was deserting his sister. Letty wore a light blue dress with ruffles at the neck and on the skirt. Her hair hung in curls, bound by a ribbon to match the dress. She looked beautiful, which made Celeste all the more conscientious of her own attire. "Today," Letty chattered happily, "we are to make plans for the pie supper." For the last week the pie supper had been the main topic of conversation among the pupils, especially the girls, for whom it seemed to have much more interest than for the boys. Even Miss Alice was aware of its importance. Perhaps this came from the fact that the purpose of the pie supper was to make money for the school. It was to Letty that Celeste was indebted for most of her information. Each girl brought a pie, she said, and the boys and men bought them. A man named an auctioneer would do the selling. "Mr. Hobgood always does that," Letty explained. "He's very good at it, the way he makes those boys bid on the girls' pies." She laughed, just thinking about it. "Well, here we are," Letty said now, "and a good thing. A little bit more and we would have been late." At that moment Miss Alice rang the bell and everyone went inside, the boys, of course, coming last. This did not happen because they were trying to be polite and allow the girls to go first. They were just not anxious for school to start. The room had windows on both sides. Double desks with aisles between the rows were anchored to the floor. Celeste slipped into hers now, and Letty slipped in after her. Each opened her pencil box at once, taking out a pen with a shiny point. Miss Alice had them to write quotations the first thing each morning, and it was well to be ready. Celeste looked straight ahead, but Letty nodded and smiled to several of the girls, Mary Barker, Sue Starks, and Edna Danvers, who all sat close to them. Then she got out her ruler and put it in the middle of the desk. Celeste had no ruler, so Letty always shared. In return of this favor, Celeste made them both identical pen wipers from a piece of Mamma's old skirt. "Just think," Letty had bragged to the other girls, "I have a pen wiper made from material which came from France." They had all seemed properly impressed. None of them acted sorry for Letty, who must sit with a girl she had not known before school started. Miss Alice made her way to the front of the room. She was very pretty, with light brown hair and pink cheeks. Today she wore a shirtwaist with a high collar and a dark skirt which rustled a little when she walked. She smelled like violets, and her hands were white and soft. Letty had told Celeste the very first day of school that she was not going to be able to keep their teacher for long. She was engaged to marry a young nester just as soon as school was out. "And what," Celeste had asked curiously, "is a nester?" "It is someone who is living out a claim, a farm," Letty explained. "Huh, so that was it." Celeste considered the matter. Finally she spoke. "Then my family too are nesters? For we are, as you say, living out a claim?" "I suppose so," Letty told her. "Most everyone here is in one way or another. My oldest brother is on a claim because he wants to get married and live there." Celeste was pleased to know the Danton family was one of many. It was good to fit into the pattern of a country. "That's the trouble with women teachers," Letty had continued. "We just can't keep them. The bachelor nesters or the cowboys snap them up practically as soon as the school gets started. My father says we ought to get real ugly ones. Then maybe we'd keep them a couple of years." Celeste hoped this would not happen. It was pleasant to look at Miss Alice, even if she wasn't going to be with them for very long. The teacher went to the platform now and sat down at her desk. From a drawer she took out a green book and turned the pages until she came to this year's roll. She began to call the names, starting with Joe Adams. Joe had a squeaky voice, so when he said present, all the other boys tried hard not to giggle. Miss Alice was very firm about this. She might look soft and pretty, but even the big boys had learned she meant them to behave. If anyone was absent, Miss Alice made the mark after his name in the roll book. Watching her, Celeste vowed that she herself was going to be a teacher when she grew up, and make marks in a green book just like the one Miss Alice had. The roll having been called, Miss Alice would go next to the board and write on it the motto for the day. Yesterday had been "Haste makes waste." The day before, "The way to have a friend is to be one." She wrote a beautiful hand. As soon as she had finished, everyone was supposed to copy the motto 5 times. Miss Alice would then pass among them, checking the writing. Celeste always got good on her effort. Perry was not so fortunate. Celeste could have told the teacher a thing or two. Perry would under no circumstances write as well as he knew how, because such skill was held in scant honor among the other boys. Today, however, Miss Alice did not go to the board. Instead, she faced the class, a worried look on her face. Perhaps, Celeste thought, she is trying to find a way to tell us she is going to marry the young nester right away, and we will be without a teacher. The very thought of such a terrible thing made Celeste sit tense and fearful, waiting for what the teacher would say. "Boys and girls," Miss Alice began, "I have sad news for you." At her words, the schoolroom became very quiet. "It concerns our pie supper," she went on. Pie supper? A buzz of talk filled the room. This indeed was a great tragedy, that something should threaten the event. Greater even than the teacher's early marriage would have been. Miss Alice continued, her pretty face troubled. "You all know Mr. Hobgood was going to sell our pies for us, but only this morning he has received word that his mother in East Texas is very ill, and he must go to her at once. So we are left with no one to take his place." Everyone sat still, looking straight at Miss Alice. This could not be. Was the whole thing to fail simply because Mr. Hopgood's mother had chosen the most inconvenient time to fall sick? "But he has always sold the pies," Letty said uncertainly, forgetting to raise her hand for permission to speak. Miss Alice ignored the breaking of the school law, which meant the occasion was indeed very serious. "Yes, I know," Miss Alice agreed, "but this time he cannot. So do any of you have any idea of someone we might get to take his place? Since I am new here, I shall have to rely on you." Everyone looked at everyone else. No one seemed to have an idea to pass on. "But," Letty said sadly, "if we don't have him, the pie supper will be a failure." "Oh, I wouldn't quite say that," Miss Alice told her. "Still, it is difficult to find someone at this late date. Difficult, but not impossible. I wonder if you boys and girls would have some suggestions. Perhaps your fathers might know of someone, or one of your fathers might be willing to take the job himself." She did not sound very hopeful. The emergency was so grave that even Tom Butterworth, who was usually more than willing to make mischief for the teachers than to find a way of helping, was almost pale with the weight of his concern. The room was very still while everyone else considered the problem. "Very well," Miss Alice said resignedly. "I am sure we will find some way out of this difficulty. Get your books out." Perry, in his place next to Tom Butterworth, was impressed by his seatmate's concern. Tom was the most happy-go-lucky boy in school, and also the most popular. Almost every time the boys played ball he was chosen captain. Bill Norwood once suggested sourly it was because he had the best baseball bat. Bill himself had no bat at all. Perry himself, however, felt this happened because everyone liked Tom, and besides, he played very well indeed. Not as well, of course, as Buzz Caldwell, but no one could be as good as Buzz. "Golly," Tom said, now not even asking for permission to speak. "What are we going to do? Call it off?" "Of course not," Miss Alice assured him. "All the plans have been made." Her voice trailed off, and a worried little frown came between her eyes. Surely, Perry thought, such a thing cannot happen. He looked around the room, saw Miss Alice's worry mirrored in every face. Every one that was except Buzz Caldwell's. He looked as if the whole matter was no problem of his, and perhaps it wasn't. All Buzz wanted to do, all he could do with any ease, was play baseball. If Tom usually got to be captain, whether because of his bat or for the reason that others liked him, Buzz was invariably chosen first. He was not a good student, being 2 grades behind himself. This came because of his attending school or remaining home, just as it suited him. He probably had no intention of even coming to the pie supper himself, so he took no interest in it. Perry could stand it no longer. He raised his hand, and when Miss Alice had nodded to him, he spoke. "Miss Alice," he said, standing beside his desk, very stiff and straight. "Yes, Perry?" Miss Alice had said. You need someone to sell the pies?" "We do indeed, Perry," Miss Alice told him kindly. "I think my papa would do that for you." Across the room he could feel Celeste's eyes on him, and a look which was both stunned and incredulous. He avoided her gaze. "Your father?" Miss Alice asked uncertainly. I mean, I I didn't know your father was an auctioneer." She broke off in a manner most unnatural for her. Perry could feel the palm of his hands growing damp, but he had gone too far to back down. "In France, where we came from," he went on, now a kind of desperation overtaking him. The way the boys and the girls were staring at him, one would think he had done something very naughty indeed, and was standing up so Miss Alice could reprimand him. "In France we had a store. I have often heard mamma say that if papa could not sell a thing, it was not possible to sell it." Ah, a store. Yes, Miss Alice said, looking thoughtful. Then, quite suddenly, she seemed to have made up her mind. It is very kind of you to offer your father's services, Perry. Perhaps you will be good enough to ask him this evening when you go home, and then tell me tomorrow whether or not he will officiate. Yes, Miss Alice, Perry said, and sat down. Never had Perry thought the day would come when he considered Martinsgate too fast. But that was exactly what he was thinking as he and Celeste rode toward home. Celeste sat behind him, silent and disapproving. If only she would say something, anything, to break the stillness. Finally he could stand it no longer. You were a great chatterbox this evening, he told her, not looking at her as he spoke. His remark broke the floodgates. "Oh, Perry!" she wailed. "Why did you do it?" "Do what?" he asked, trying to act innocent. "You know what I mean. Why did you say Papa would auction the pies for the supper?" Perry did not answer. Why indeed had he spoken? Because the need was so great? Because he wanted to appear a hero before his fellow students? Because he knew Papa would truly do well? You yourself saw what the situation was, he finally replied, not quite answering her question. Something had to be done. Besides, it is as I said. Papa can sell. We have seen him many, many times. Yes, Celeste agreed, but it was Mamma's shop. He would tease the ladies who came in and laugh with them, and soon they would buy the things Mamma had. This will be different. Selling is selling, Perry retorted airily, wishing he felt as confident as he sounded. There is one thing you have overlooked, Celeste told him. Papa will not consent to this. I know he will not. What is the matter? Mamma had asked anxiously at supper. Are you sick? You're eating scarcely anything, Perry. Nothing, he muttered. Are you sure you have not been in trouble at school? Michelle asked practically. No, Perry mumbled, devoting his attention to his meal. Papa regarded him thoughtfully. At length he laid down his fork. Perry, my boy, he said kindly, it is obvious that you have a serious problem of some sort. Come, let us hear it. Perry cleared his throat. Twice he tried to speak, but no words came. Finally he began. Papa, he said, his voice sounding high and frightened in his own ears, I today told Miss Alice, our teacher, that you would sell the pies for our pie supper the day after tomorrow. Sell the pies? Papa, Mamma, and Michelle all chorused together. Sell the pies? Papa repeated sternly. Perry, what were you thinking of? Never have I done such a thing. What made you give such a rash promise? Perry hung his head. He gave no answer. Celeste could endure it no longer. True, Perry had been foolish in making such a promise, but even so, Papa should know the reason back of it. Papa, she said, this is the way of it, and she went on to explain the situation, how Mr. Hobgard, who had always done the work before, had been most unfortunately called away by the illness of his mother, and how Miss Alice was so worried about having no auctioneer that she quite forgot to send them to writing quotations before school started. It is a very important event, this pie supper, Perry put in hopefully. The money is used to buy books and other necessary things for the school. Papa looked thoughtful. Your papa, none of us ever have so much even heard such thing as a pie supper before this, Mamma reminded them in a tone that seemed to settle the whole question. Perry looked down at his hands, lines of unhappiness written all over his face. But Papa, Celeste said desperately, there was no one else. She was torn between fear for the fate of the pie supper and concern over Perry's unhappiness. Miss Alice asked if there was, possibly, someone among our papas who would take Mr. Hobgood's place. So, Perry told him, I said you would. Mas none? Mamma protested. Your papa was not a salesman. Oh, he was, Celeste cried. Remember how he used to help you sell things? But that was only a joke. Everyone understood what he was doing. It was for fun. Letty says the pie supper is much fun, Celeste said hopefully. Papa stood up. Stop worrying my family, he said, smiling at them. I have told you many times how important it is to offer to do our part here in our community of which we have so lately become members. Perry did well to offer my services when an emergency was so great. Perry stood straighter and looked a little more happy. The rest of you cheer up as well, Papa went on. By tomorrow, your Miss Alice will surely have found someone else to do the important work. She will not turn it over to someone who knows nothing about the matter. She was only being polite when you offered my services, and she accepted them. Of course, Mamma agreed, looking relieved. Now, finish your suppers, everyone. Celeste and Perry tried to do as Mamma had bid them, but the food had scant flavor. They could not entirely agree with Papa's hopeful words. Both remembered that in spite of Miss Alice's concern, not one boy or girl, except Perry, of course, had been able to think of anyone who might take Mr. Hobgart's place as auctioneer. Perhaps, after all, Papa was going to be forced to do the work about which he knew nothing. Celeste could not be sure which was the greatest worry to her, that the pie supper would fail, or that Papa would be embarrassed, or that Perry would have everyone laughing at him because of his foolish offer. Any one of these things would be bad enough in itself. There was, of course, the chance that all three would happen. She found herself wishing she had never heard of the thing called a pie supper.